Hello. This paper is on prominence in Japanese, which is not only cued acoustically, and Koichi Tateishi is reading the paper. I assume that participants can freely pause and play back while watching, so I will move among slides fairly quickly. This paper is about prominence in Japanese, which is often called focus. It is marked syntactically, morphologically, and prosodically in languages. The structure of the paper is as shown in this slide. With the term focus, this paper refers to the information that the speaker assumes is not shared by the hearer. There are three types of focus: broad focus, narrow focus, and contrastive focus. Focus is marked in various ways cross-linguistically, and we focus on whether prosodic markers are good enough for marking of focus. According to Lee et al., languages differ in how well their speakers communicate the location of contrastive focus by purely prosodic means of F0, intensity, and duration. American English and Mandarin Chinese are languages with substantial modulation of three prosodic features. Naturally, speakers of the two languages recognize the location of focus with high accuracy. However, Seoul Korean and South Kansan Korean do not clearly mark contrastive focus prosodically, causing low accuracy rate of focus recognition. Lee et al. Studied the prosodic property of contrastive focus in sequences of numbers. They did a production experiment with a corrected number in a sequence as in this slide. And they also did perception experiment using a sequence of numbers with a correction in it. This slide is the result of their production experiment. While American English and Mandarin Chinese use prosodic marking of focus strongly, Korean dialects and Tokyo Japanese do not. Taking up on Lee et al. Results, we conducted a study on identification of focus in Japanese. If Lee et al.'s study is on the right track, the identification of Japanese contrastive focus with weak prosodic cues should be low. To examine it, we conducted a perception experiment using Japanese and English materials on Japanese L1, English L2 listeners. Materials we used are Japanese and English number sequences with one number corrected. This is a Japanese example. The task in the experiment was identification of the digit corrected, using the answer parts of the conversations as in the previous slide. Participants were separate for the Japanese experiment and the English experiments. This is the result. Sequences of numbers in the two languages are divided into three phonological phrases with 3, 3, and 4 numbers, and the identification ratios were lower for the third phrase in Japanese. As Lee et al.'s study suggested, Japanese focus cannot be identified as highly as English. Does this show that English has stronger acoustic cues for focus than Japanese? In the recording materials used for the experiment, English focus strongly correlates with F0, while Japanese focus correlates with the RMS intensity. This graph shows the correlation. As shown in this graph, the correct correlation of max F0 and focus is straightforward in English, while in Japanese, focus correlates with the RMS intensity only moderately. Also, we compare the answer sequence with contrastive focus as previously shown and the answer sentence with broad focus, that is, with no contrast. It turned out that Japanese contrastive focus had significantly longer duration than the number in the same position in the broad focus context, as in English. Another factor that may be related to the low identification ratio in Japanese as compared with English would be the fact that Japanese numbers in sequence must have fixed accented patterns no matter what their original lexical accent patterns would be. In particular, the number without an accent at all may cause perception errors because there is no accentual peak in these words. Taking up on the results of the perception experiments, we shifted our focus on the nature of focus in Japanese in production. Japanese accents are expressed with high-low pitch sequences, but some words are accentless. It is said that accented focus causes boosting of the F0 peak and downstepping, and focal cues in U and accented words are not yet known very well. So, we wanted to test whether accented narrow focus is clearly cued as is often said, and we also wanted to examine the cues to narrow focus on U words. As U words have low-high sequence without accentual lowering, we predicted that the narrow focus only raises the pitch, and without downstep, it is harder to perceive. For the production experiment, we used materials as shown, 2 noun sequences in all possible accent patterns. With focus added, we made 12 types of materials. 5 Tokyo Japanese speakers recorded the material for the experiment. We asked participants to read and record material sentences shown on PowerPoint slides. We asked them to record conversations solo, as in this slide. Following Ishihara 2016, we took the normalized F0 means of peaks and troughs in each word. The graph shows the results of AA accented conditions. This is the results of UU unaccented sequences. This is the results of the AU sequences. And this is the results of the UA sequences. We found out less focal effects than we expected. First, accentual F0 rise was only observed in AU plus F and UA plus F sequences. Also, post-focal lowering reduction was found only in A plus FU sequences. This is where the focal effects were observed, circled in the graphs. Given weaker focal effects observed, we did another perception experiment. We made materials with the 12 accentual patterns of various lengths, materials with broad focus, and distractors. Participants listened to the answers to WH questions and marked the words that are focused. If it is judged to be in a broad focused context, they mark the whole utterance. For distractors, we used numbers, as in the previous experiment. This is the confusion matrix based on the responses. This is the result of the t-test. We can find significant differences between focus A words and U words only in the XU and UX sequences. Focal effects were only partly found and they depend on accentual conditions. We could not find an overall focal effects as stated in previous literature. Finally, we shifted our focus onto broad focus. We did that because prosodic cues for narrow focus turned out not to be significant enough. We wondered whether focus is cued with other means. We did an RPT experiment as mentioned by Ko and her colleagues. Participants listen to the spontaneous speech and mark boundaries and prominence they detected. Materials, tokens of morphemes, and the participants are as in this slide. As a result, participants agreed on where the boundaries are, B scores, than where the prominences are, P scores. We did not find any significant difference in marking of prominence between accent types. As for relationship between marked prominences and boundaries, the following was found. The primary prominence Q was range if 0, and the secondary one was max if 0. As for boundaries, the primary Q was duration. As compared with the previous RPT study by Pinter et al. On English, Japanese focal detection depends more on boundaries than prominence. Because, as our two experiments have shown, prominence is not easy to identify, even in spontaneous speech. Now, no matter what language we talk about, in RPT studies, B scores are higher than P scores. Our data is not an exception. One cause of this may be differences in acoustic cues in prominence. They vary cross-linguistically. According to Venditti et al., at the prosodic boundaries, Japanese uses pitch movements as shown in Table 8, while at the prominence, rise and rise-fall are mainly used as prominence lending tones. In our spontaneous speech materials, various types of prominence lending tones are used as in Table 9. This is an example of PL tones, rise-fall and rise respectively. Japanese utilizes LHL, HL, LH, and H as PL tones. Accordingly, they show higher range if 0 and max if 0. However, as we have shown in Table 7 in the previous slide, prominence marks are less in frequency than boundary marks. This is probably because Japanese is a language with downtrend, which makes the initial position of each intonational phrase stand out anyway, with or without focus. So effects cannot be expected even if an IP initial element is highlighted with acoustic cues. In conclusion, our study shows that, as a marker of focal prominence, Japanese uses prominence lending tones, which raises max if 0 and widens range if 0. However, its roles are less significant than boundary marking tones, which marks broad focus. There are two somehow contradictory views on focus differing in whether focus initiates an independent major phrase or not. Our study seems to show that focal effects are not phrasal and not strong enough to be identified with phrasal break. We thank these people for their help. Thank you very much.